Today I'm going to be doing my September reading wrap-up. I had a pretty good reading month, so let's get into it. So overall this month I read 10 books, which was very good for me. I think that's the most books that I have read in a month so far this year. And a couple of these were pretty thick books that took me a while to get through. The first book that I read this month was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is the first Lisa Jewell book that I have read. Overall, it's about these two women. At the beginning, they both go out to dinner for their birthdays, and they don't know each other before this, and then they kind of realize that they're birthday twins, in fact not even just born on the same day, but like the same year as well. And they're also very different women. One of them is a much more like accomplished woman who has a podcast that has a fairly big following, and then this other woman is kind of more mysterious. You can tell that like something's a little off with her, but you don't necessarily know exactly what. She seems a little strange. She has this possibly weird relationship with her husband, and her husband's much older than her. So yeah, kind of juxtaposition of this seemingly very successful woman and this woman that a little bit weird. But they, the woman, what's her name again? Josie. Josie's the woman that is a little more mysterious, and she approaches Alex, who's the one with the podcast, and says, you know, I know you normally do your podcast on women that are very successful, and that have gone through some big change in their life that's made them super successful, but have you ever thought about doing a podcast about a woman that's about to become successful or like about to change her life? And Alex is like, no, that sounds possibly kind of interesting. She's kind of intrigued by this strange woman. So they start doing this podcast together, and it kind of just goes from there, where you're kind of just slowly learning more and more about Josie's life. It's a thriller, if I didn't say that already, and this book was very, very good. I think this is probably one of my like top 2 thrillers I've ever read, the other one being Local Woman Missing, which I really enjoyed, but this book I really liked. I overall gave it 4.5 stars. It was just very bingeable. It was very difficult to put down. You constantly wanted to know what was coming. And even though there was like almost an aspect of like an unreliable narrator where you weren't quite sure if everything Josie was telling you about herself was true, they didn't do it in a way that I felt lied to. I guess sometimes when books do that, I kind of feel like, well, you just tricked me because you lied the entire book. So of course I didn't guess the ending, but this one I felt like it was just done in a really, really good way with multiple twists and turns that I was not able to predict. So yeah, if you're looking for a good thriller, I would definitely recommend this one. Okay, and then the next book that I read was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is another one that I saw a lot of people reading and recommending, so I decided to give it a try. This is about a woman, Kit. So Kit McDeer is kind of like a home health aide. They kind of allude to her having some type of mystery in her past, which is causing her to have difficulty in being able to get another job as a home health aide. But her boss calls her and says, I got a possible job for you, and it's at this big mansion in this very rich area, and Kit's like, that's kind of weird that this job would be open. But then she finds out that the person that she's going to be caring for is, her name's Lenora Hope, and she's kind of someone that's just like well known in the community as having murdered her family in the past. And there's like a little jingle that they say about Lenora Hope, something to do with rope and how she killed all of her family. It's very similar to like Lizzie Borden, Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. Like there's basically another version of that for Lenora Hope. And so she's kind of creeped out by the idea of caring for this woman that's supposed to have killed her family, but she was never actually convicted of it. And as she's working at this home, she's starting to wonder whether or not it really was true, whether this woman really did kill her family or not. that's starting to get a little more mysterious. She finds that Lenore can actually use a typewriter, even though she's had a stroke and is pretty incapacitated in her ability to really communicate with anyone, but she can use the typewriter, so she starts to tell Kit her story, and Kit just starts to learn more and more about the past of this house and Lenora. This one was good overall, I would say. I overall gave it 3.5 stars. The reason it's a bit lower, I guess, number one, there were several slower aspects of the story, and they were also kind of trying to make Kit's past seem more mysterious, which I felt like was just pretty uninteresting. Like, I don't know, it kind of was confusing about how these stories were really going to ever come together, and so it would get boring throughout, and they really were building up to things that would happen at the end, but at the time it was just like, why are you telling me about this? I'm really not interested. Can we get back to the actual story? And then there were just a ton of twists at the end. It was one of those books that has big twists that you probably could not fully predict because they were just so out there, and some of them I kind of saw coming, but it was still just like big twist after big twist at the end, which I enjoyed, but also it was kind of a bit much. It was kind of like, if you just have the one big twist, that might be good enough and might make it a more enjoyable book, in my opinion, instead of like completely flipping over everything that you think you know. So yeah, overall 3.5 stars. It was a good, enjoyable thriller. It had very creepy vibes, I guess, because it was like on this old mansion on a cliff, which I will say that's one thing that annoyed me throughout the entire book, is they kept talking about the possibility of this mansion falling off the cliff. It was just like on a cliff in Maine, and the house had a giant crack that was just forming through the house in this entire book, and the main character Kit keeps talking about how this crack is getting bigger, but people seem not actually that concerned. Like, I feel like that would be a reason to have someone come and look at the house and see if it's actually going to fall into the water. I don't really get how that was not addressed, and that's just kind of a small thing they kept talking about that bothered me. But anyway, on to the next book. Okay, and then the next book that I read was 28 Summers by Ellen Hildebrand. I picked this one up because I've really enjoyed a lot of Ellen Hildebrand's books in the past. I feel like they're very good at feeling like light reads, but also have some type of mystery element generally, or at least the ones that I've read in the past that I have really enjoyed. For example, Hotel Nantucket, there was like a lighter, beachy romance feel, but then there was still like kind of a mystery that they were trying to solve throughout, and yeah, I enjoyed that overall. And I kind of assumed this book had a similar type of thing, but it did not. This was very different. I mean, it still had the general like Ellen Hildebrand type writing and feel, so it was good overall, definitely, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting. And so this book is about these two people who kind of meet through, let's see, so Mallory has just inherited this beachfront cottage, and then her brother asks her if he can have his bachelor party there, and she says yes, so her brother Cooper comes with a couple of his friends, and one of them is called Jake, and Jake and Mallory really hit it off. The weekend kind of goes not as expected, but they really hit it off and really like each other, and start off this kind of romance over that weekend. It ends up being just the two of them at the house because of a series of unfortunate events. And they really start to like each other, and then at the end of the weekend they're like, okay, are we going to stay together or what? And Mallory says, I really don't want to do a long distance relationship. And they say, what we're going to do instead is every single year on this exact weekend, Labor Day weekend, we're going to meet up and just spend the weekend together, just the two of us, and pretend like none of the rest of the world is real. So you're just kind of covering 28 summers of them doing this, meeting up every summer, and they're also kind of talk about other things that are going on in their life, but then no matter what, they always make sure to meet up. So overall a romance, but kind of just more like long-term literary fiction, I guess. Like, I feel like not too much of it is focused on the actual romance that's happening every summer. Like, they're honestly pretty short about each of these summers. I thought they would talk a little bit more about them. But overall, I gave this one 4 stars, I believe. Yeah, 4 stars. I think just because I really like Elin Hilderbrand's writing. I thought it was really well written. There were definitely some things that annoyed me. It's kind of weird. I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but you know, as they're doing this every summer, obviously the two of them are also dating people and in different relationships, but then they're still coming back every summer to have their little Labor Day weekend. So it's just kind of weird. Because you're like you want them to be together, but at the same time you're like, you're dating someone else. So it's kind of weird that you're just like completely ignoring that and getting together with each other every Labor Day weekend and acting like nobody else exists. But yeah, good book overall, and I would definitely recommend, especially as like a summer read in the future. The next book that I read was Finding Me by Viola Davis. This one I listened to as an audiobook, and it's just like Viola Davis's autobiography. It starts out when she's a little kid and she's just talking about her life up until she started to really get this big fame that she has today and starts to get those really those roles that you recognize her for. And this was a really, really good book. I gave this one 5 stars. It was just so interesting to just hear about her life and how she grew up from complete poverty. Like, her family lived in this tiny rat-infested, disgusting apartment with no ability to like wash themselves, usually no electricity, or at least not electricity in their full apartment, with a bunch of kids all living in the same place. And she really like started from nothing and worked really, really hard to achieve what her dream was. And yeah, I don't know what else to really say about that, except I would definitely recommend this book if you enjoy autobiographies by different type of famous people, I guess. Yeah, I think this one was especially interesting because she really did have a story to tell, and a story that thankfully I cannot relate to, but I'm sure some people can, of being in those conditions and definitely not having any privilege in her skin color and being a woman and her family's financial situation. But how she was very, very lucky and hardworking, but definitely luck played into her being able to become the very successful actress that she is, and all the challenges she faced along the way. So I think she just had a really interesting story to tell in an autobiography, and it wasn't just written just to talk about their privileged life and how they became famous. So I would definitely recommend that one if you enjoy autobiographies. And then the next book that I read was The Winter Sea by Susanna Kersley. And this one is a book that one of my good friends had loaned to me, because we both read, at least read one other book by this author and enjoyed it in the past. And this is about this woman who's a writer, and she goes to, she's like a historical fiction writer, so she really likes to like go to the locations that her books are taking place in order to learn more about everything and really like feel what the environment is like that these characters would have been living in. And so she ends up visiting Scotland, doing research for this book that she's writing, and she really starts to like feel like Scotland is like communicating with her. It sounds kind of dumb, and it kind of was one of the negative parts of the book that was a little bit dumb, but she basically finds out that she has these ancestral memories because she had ancestors that lived in that area of Scotland. She's kind of like been passed down their memories, so since she's in this area, she's remembering things that her ancestors remembered, so that's allowing her to like really easily write this book because she's just like writing down their memories. So you're getting both her experience of exploring this town, and then also you're hearing her ancestors' story of this girl that went to live with her extended family in Scotland, and then kind of had this romance, just her trials and tribulations of living in Scotland, kind of during the like Jacobite Revolution. I'm not sure if that's the right way to describe that, but Overall, I gave this book 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it overall. Felt like a very, very slow read. I felt like there was just, mostly I liked the story of when she was remembering her ancestors' memories. I felt like that story was interesting, and I wished that that was the entire story, and then they would go back into telling about the writer and how she was having this romance with this dude in the town, and I kind of just didn't care. I just wanted to know about her actual, like, ancestor stories, because that was much more exciting. And so I think that's kind of a lot of how Suzanne Kearsley's books are, though. She kind of is doing dual time points, which I think I'm just not a huge fan of. But besides that, it was good. I kind of just ignored the fact that it was ancestral memories, and that didn't seem scientifically possible to me, but I tried to just ignore that and just pretend that she was just like writing about this true story, and I was just enjoying the true story. Yeah, so I would recommend if you like historical fiction. If you don't, this would not be the book for you because it's kind of slow. It's definitely not a fast-paced book, but it is an overall well-written book. Okay, and then the next book that I read after that was Good Bad Girl by Alice Feeney. I don't even know how to describe what this book is about. Let me see what the inside page says. So yeah, briefly it just says, 20 years after a baby is stolen from a stroller, a woman is killed. The two crimes are somehow linked and spark a mystery with 3 suspects, 2 murders, and 1 victim. And they are telling you about the POVs from several different characters. It says, Edith might have been tricked into a nursing home by her estranged daughter Cleo, but at 80 years young she's planning her escape. Her only friend is a young woman named Patience, an employee at the home who forms a real bond with Edith, but Patience is lying about almost everything, and after an approach by a mysterious stranger, Cleo is forced back into Edith's life whether she likes it or not. The reason I say I don't know how to like explain this book and had to read the cover is because you don't know what's happening at all until like the last 50 pages maybe, and it's just one of those books where they're trying to keep you so confused. They're switching between, I think it was 4 points of view, but it felt like even more because it would have a couple pages of this one person's point of view doing something that didn't make sense, like, and then they would switch to someone else, and then you'd switch back, and you were just so confused, and I don't even know what's happening and how these people are connected, and I kind of want to keep reading to find out, but also like I'm not even attached to anyone because you're switching between so many people that, do I care? Got more exciting towards the end because you were finally able to put enough pieces together that you knew how like the characters were related, and then we're trying to just kind of figure out like who killed this person. And I feel like the author did a good job of like having a little bit of little twists and turns at the end that all fell into place as you kind of unearthed who was who. But overall, I think I gave this one 3.5 stars after I read it. Now I think I'd maybe drop it down to a 3 stars just because I feel like it was not a memorable book. I wouldn't really recommend it as a thriller. I definitely don't think I would recommend it as an audiobook. Not that I listened to it as an audiobook, but I'm just imagining, as confused as I was, the amount of times I had to flip back and be like, wait, who's this person we're hearing from now, and what do we know about them, because we only got 2 pages from them like 20 pages ago. So yeah, very confusing overall, but definitely was a super fast read. Like I feel like I read this in basically a day, because it's pretty short. That's another thing that I felt like it could have been longer and we could have just gotten a little bit more information, but a very quick read. A thriller that has some twists in it that you might not see coming, but overall I wouldn't really recommend it, but I wouldn't say don't read that. That's kind of what my 3 stars I feel like means. If someone else was reading it, I'd be like, okay, let me know what you think, because I didn't quite know how I felt about this book. And then the next book that I read this month was Summer of Broken Rules, and this one is about this, so it's a YA romance, which I didn't necessarily realize it was YA when I had reserved it from the library, but then by the time I got it, I had heard that it was YA. I also heard that it had a lot of Taylor Swift references, which I enjoy Taylor Swift's music, but I'm not like a complete Swiftie, so I think a lot of people enjoyed it for the fact that they caught on to these little like Taylor Swift references, which I totally missed. I didn't notice a single Taylor Swift reference in that book. But overall, it's about this girl who's, I think she's like 18 years old, she's about to go to college, but every summer her family has like this little farm on Martha's Vineyard that they get together and kind of just like spend a couple weeks together in the summer. However, she hasn't been back in a couple years because her sister died like a year and a half ago or something, and now her cousin is getting married, and so it's kind of her first time back with her family, like a more extended family, after her sisters died, which makes it sound like a sad book, but it wasn't. It was very like overall lighthearted summer read type book, but she's, you know, kind of dealing with that a little bit and figuring out how to navigate the friendships with her cousins and stuff after she's gone through this kind of like traumatic situation. And then she also meets this boy that's like from the groom side of the family, so she's never met him before, and they start to have this little like summer romance throughout the book. Overall, I thought it was fine. I think I'm not a big fan of like YA romances because I always just find them pretty cringy. And this one definitely fell into that category. I could see how like younger me would have liked aspects, like there would be things that I would be like, oh, that's so cringy, and then I would think, I feel like middle school Ariana would have thought that that was actually cute or something like that. So overall I gave it 3 stars. I think it was a very cute read, and it was sweet, and overall they were like surprisingly good at communication for a YA novel. Like they would be like, okay, we need to talk this through and figure out what our issues are, which I was like, that's kind of impressive, because I'm always I think that's one of the reasons I don't like YA romance or a lot of romance in general, is because they just don't talk about things, and you're like, if you just told each other what you thought, all the problems would be solved. So yeah, I think this one would be good for a much younger audience than me, or a huge Taylor Swift fan if you could get all the references. But I enjoyed it. It was a nice, light, very quick audiobook listen. Yeah. Okay, and then the next book that I read was Coleman Hill by Kim Coleman Foote. And this book it kind of takes place in the years following like the Great Migration of people that had lived in the South that were slaves, and then after that kind of more like indentured servants, but then they're slowly starting to move out of the South and trying to get jobs and get their families to the North so that they can have somewhat better rights and just get out of the Jim Crow South and hope to have better lives for their children. And this is, I forget what the word that they used the author somewhere mentioned how to describe this book. It's not nonfiction, but it's like based off of stories from the author's ancestors. So it's based in truth, but definitely you can tell like there's no way she'd know all these details about her ancestors. But it's just kind of going through the lives. They show you this family tree of many different characters in like the Coleman family, and this family that they kind of get connected to by marriage. And it's really just discussing the lives of everyone from, not everyone, but a lot of the people from that family, and just a lot of the hardships they went through, living even in the North, but living there in it starts in 1960, so living there in just like the early 1900s, when they still did not have really equal opportunity, and their parents and everything hadn't gone to college because they'd never been given that ability, so then they were less inclined to go to college because they didn't have anyone showing them that that was possible. So you can just see how it's this very generational pass down of it's hard to get to the top if everyone in your family hasn't had those experiences and hasn't shown you that that's possible before. And I thought it was interesting because a lot of the characters, like if you just looked on paper of like at the end of their life, you would be like, wow, they were really not successful, they must not have tried very hard, like they were just not good people, like they were abusive to their wife, and they just didn't seem like good people or people that you would think of as like the protagonist, I guess, but you also are hearing about their childhood kind of going back and forth throughout the book. So you're kind of learning, you can kind of connect with them and see they went through all of this trauma as children, and so it kind of makes sense how they really, really struggled in life. And they might have some regrets in things that they have done, but they were definitely not given the best circumstances. So overall, I think I gave this book, 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's definitely the type of book that I usually really enjoy. I think the reason it wasn't 5 stars is because it did go through so many different people in such a short amount of time. Like, you can see it's not a very thick book, so I feel like it could have delved a lot deeper into a lot of people's stories and kind of been a much thicker book that spanned this amount of time period, instead of you kind of like quickly going through all of these people. So you never got super connected to them, because then you were on to hearing about their child story or something like that. But overall, I really enjoyed this and would definitely recommend it. Okay, and now we're down to my last 2 reads of this year, or this month. The next book that I read was Jurassic Park. I always really enjoyed the Jurassic Park movie. I feel like I don't need to really explain what Jurassic Park is about. I think everyone knows in general, but I always really enjoy the Jurassic Park movie, and I saw someone reading this on the bus, and I was like, oh, I knew there was a book it was based off of, but I didn't know if it was a very good book, so I looked it up on Goodreads, saw that it had pretty good reviews, like over 4 stars, so I decided to give it a try, and I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, I believe. Overall, I did really enjoy it, and I read through this book really fast. It's one of those books with very short chapters, so you kind of just speed through it. You also want to know whether or not they're going to get eaten by a dinosaur, so it was good for that reason as well. The reason I gave it 3.5 stars and not a better rating is because, honestly, I feel like most of the time I think the book's better than the movie, but in this case, and it could just be because I watched the movie first multiple times before ever reading the book, but I think that the movie did a better job than the book in many ways. I actually just rewatched the movie last night, so it's very like fresh in my mind of how this book is different than the movie. Basically, the book goes into way more detail, and not even detail is the right word, but like back and forth of like, oh, the dinosaur's getting them, now they're safe, oh, now they're not, now they're safe, now they're not. And the movie does that like a few times, which I feel like is good, but this one, it's just like non-stop. Problem solved, now there's a problem solved, now there's a problem, which I just felt like was getting so slow. There's also a lot more characters in this book, which a lot of the characters are, I noticed, technically in the movie, but they're not given as big of roles, so you don't notice or care about them as much, but in the book they're given a lot bigger roles and mentioned a lot more. And honestly, there were a lot of like the employees of Jurassic Park whose, I couldn't remember their names, so like I knew that these 5 people were all just people that like worked in the control room and were trying to help out, and I didn't know who was who, but I just would be like, oh, that was one of the control room people. So I feel like it just was like a little too much, but still an enjoyable read, and I would recommend reading this if you enjoy the Jurassic Park movie. Okay, and then the last book that I read this month was Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. And this one, many people might know what it's about, both from hearing about the books and from the TV show, but overall it's about this woman living in the 40s, and she has a husband. She's worked as a nurse during the war, and now her and her husband have been reunited, so they go off on like a little second honeymoon since they've been apart for so long during the war, and they go up into the Scottish Highlands, and basically she ends up touching this rock in one of these like rock circles, kind of like Stonehenge, and touching that rock takes her back to like the 1700s, so all of a sudden she's transported back 200 years and just thrown into this life that's very different than what she's used to, and she ends up kind of meeting a love interest, but it's also just talking about her trying to stay safe in the Scottish Highlands while there's all this fighting between the Scots and the British. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I had seen people talk about how it was just very slow, which it kind of was at some points, but I felt like I enjoyed their writing enough that it didn't feel that slow to me, and I think I mean, it's basically a historical fiction book, even though there's like the fantasy or sci-fi element for going back in time. It really just reads like a historical fiction, which is one of my favorite genres. So I really enjoyed this book, and I think I'm going to give the next book a try and see how it is. Okay, yes, so that was all of the 10 books that I read this month. I read 7 physical copies of books and then 3 audiobooks. And it was a good month. I feel like most books I read I enjoyed, even if I didn't love them. I didn't really have any book that I hated this month, which was really nice. So that's it for this video. I'm going to try and do a video in between this one and my October wrap-up, possibly showing all my 5-star reads or doing a book haul of a lot of the books that I've bought from library book sales recently, since that's been my newest obsession. But in the meantime, make sure to subscribe and like this video if you want to keep following my future videos.